Welcome to my composition masterclass, where I'm going to lay down the groundwork for you in terms of finding your own voice as a composer. Now, this is going to be really good for you if you're someone that struggles to develop your ideas, or perhaps you do have ideas, but you're not sure how to get them from start to finish. Okay, this is going to be really good for you. Really good for you if you're someone that struggles with writer's block. Like, how do we get over that hurdle? Like, we are very creative, right? But how do we get to this point without hitting a wall? That happens quite a lot as a composer. And last but not least, how do we internalize feedback, right? Whether that be feedback from yourself or feedback from others, okay? So let's get straight into it. This is going to be the first of a series of videos, and this one, of course, is going to be called Welcome to Prelude. Welcome to Prelude, meaning that this is going to be basically the ground floor for how we're going to build the rest of this course. Okay, so let's get started with what we're going to cover in this course. Okay, so who is this course for, right? Who is it for specifically? Is this course for you? Okay, what is going to be the course curriculum? Okay, what is going to be the step-by-step process that I'm going to take you from A to Z? All right. The next thing that we're going to cover is who the heck am I? Okay. If you've been following me on YouTube, for example, for a while, you know who I am. But for those of you that are new, this would be really good just to give you a little bit of a taste of what I do as a composer and as a pedagogue. Okay. So that will be later on in this video. And what is a composer, right? We have our own kind of idea of what we think a composer is, but how broad is this definition, right? Or can it be broader in terms of what is a composer and what does a composer actually do? All right. And then I'm going to share with you how to get help, right? How to get help as a composer, because we all are going to need help at some point. And then we're going to have a summary at the very end. All right. Now, you already follow me here on YouTube, hopefully, but I also do have an Instagram, a Spotify, an Apple Podcast, right? Follow for exclusive content on those platforms. And if you don't know, I do have a podcast called The Sad Haddad Show, where I interview various composers, and you can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Share the course. If you love the course and love what you see here, please do spread it around. Let's spread our love for composing. And warning, this is the most important video in the entire course. Watch the entire video, don't skip, don't fast forward. And pro tip, watch the video in 2x speed unless there is music playing, of course. Okay, so I want to share with you some results of my teachings just to give you an idea of how I've taught this to other students. So this is Amelia, and she says, with SAD's help, I was able to earn a Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Southern California Thorne School of Music. Disclaimer, I also went to USC, more on that later. And I can't tell you how proud I was when she gave me the call and said, Sad, I got into USC. I basically just started crying at that spot. I couldn't believe it. Not because she's not a talented composer, but I just couldn't believe that I basically took the student from A to Z and she was able to achieve this incredible result. She's also attended summer programs such as Boston University Tanglewood Institute, the Curtis Summerfest, Atlantic Music Festival, the NY Screen Scoring Program, and she's worked with professional ensembles like the Rhythm Method Quartet and Hub New Music. Okay, let me show you somebody else. This is London. He finished a 3-movement piece for clarinet and accordion that he's really proud of, and I can tell you that I've heard this piece and it's really quite fantastic. And he says that so much of your advice helped shape this piece into what is today. So that's London from Ohio. And then we have Jude. He says that he's been out of formal composition study for some time when he began with me. And he feels that his skills, which had rusted, have been restored. And he's over here in New Jersey where I live as well. And I'm really proud of Jude because he really came out of his shell and he's writing all these really incredible pieces, a lot of them inspired by the composer and also the, well, we're going to see what composer means later on, but by the guitar player and the songwriter Frank Zappa. So I'm really proud of Jude as well. So who is this for? Okay, who is this course for? Now, beginners. If you're new to composing, this course will guide you step by step on how to realize your musical ideas. Basic music notation and music theory skills are required, but these skills can be readily learned online. So basically, if you're new to composing, right, this masterclass is going to be good for you. But I do suggest that you have some basic notation skills down. Know what pitches are in the treble clef, right? Know what pitches are in the bass clef. Know some basic theory in terms of chord progressions, voice leading, and so on. I'm not going to cover these things in any detail in this masterclass because there are really so many free resources out there where you can learn these things. So I would start there before continuing on with this masterclass, okay? The next group of people are going to be hobbyists. Now, if you have a day job, are retired, or just want to compose for fun, this course will help you develop much faster than you likely can on your own. So the number one thing that I hear from hobbyists, especially people that have day jobs, is that they just don't have enough time to acquire the skills, and they have to poke around the internet and listen to a bunch of people talk about composition to realize how to do their own composing. This course, or at least this masterclass here, I'm going to help you figure out how to do that a little bit faster so that you're not poking around. You just have one place where you're learning everything in terms of how to compose, okay? This is really good if you're in grade school, especially I would say high school and undergraduate students. If you're studying music composition or another music-related discipline, this course offers a fresh approach by combining technical skills with real-world experience. So oftentimes, if you're studying music composition or even just music in general, if you're playing an instrument, for example, there are a lot of little things that you're learning, but rarely is it straight up composing. Rarely is it like, okay, how do I actually compose and put pitches down on paper? I found that when I was an undergraduate student, yes, I did have private lessons, but I felt like it was very project based and not very holistic based. So this masterclass is going to show you a little bit more of the craft of the actual composing and what we're trying to think of when we're composing music, okay? The next group of people are going to be probably the smallest group of people that this masterclass is going to be serving, and that's going to be professionals and graduate students. Graduate students meaning people that are doing their master's degree or their doctorate degrees. This course covers often overlooked topics like commissions, royalties, publishing, academic job market preparation, marketing, and other business-related areas to fill any gaps you may have. Now, in this week's of masterclasses, I'm not going to cover any of these topics. This is going to be covered way along during the course, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of what's to come, all right? Now, let's cover what is going to happen in this week's masterclass, okay? So, welcome to Prelude. That's going to be this video, right? The results. Who is this for? What is this course? Who am I? How to get help, etc. Then the very next video in this module is going to be Prelude to Ideas. Learn how concepts, rhythm, melody, harmony, and timbre are used to create music. So we're laying the ground floor here. We're laying the ground floor, like what are the compositional elements that you should be aware of? And in my opinion, these are the concepts that you have to learn first about on a basic level before you can start composing things based out of these various tenets that I've listed here. Now, the next module is going to be Prelude to Writer's Block. Discover the reasons composers encounter this challenge and explore effective strategies to overcome it. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've seen composers that are really excited about an idea, right? They have all these things down that I talk about in the Prelude to Ideas video: concepts, rhythm, melody, harmony. They have all this down, but they hit a block and then they can't write any more music. So I think it's really, really important to cover this writer's block idea head on in the third module and not wait for it. So we're going to learn more about that later on in this masterclass. Prelude to Essentials. So these are going to be your writing tools, hardware, software, and in my opinion, the most important thing, your workspace, making sure that you have a very kind of Zen-like environment to compose. My teacher at Columbia University, Professor Georg Haas, he told me that his environment, that when he composes, it's almost like he's going to church. It's a spiritual journey. So I want to get you pumped up to be able to do this as well. Come up with a workspace that is conducive to your own writing, right? And of course, we're going to cover the technical things that you need as well, your tools, your hardware, and your software. But you're going to see that when we get to this module here, that a lot of it is quite basic. Really, the most important thing is your workspace. Prelude to Feedback. Again, handling external feedback from others and internal feedback from yourself. So crucial. We're going to cover how to handle these different types of feedback. We're going to cover why it's so important as a composer. Usually as a composer, we think of ourselves as these hermit folks, that these lonely, solitary figures. I'm going to show you why external as well as internal feedback is so important, especially as you progress as a composer. And last but not least, we're going to do a module called Prelude to Score Study, finding, reading, analyzing, and most importantly, applying scores that inspire your practice. I can't tell you how important this is. I've started so many pieces because I was inspired by one or two very specific pieces, and even lifting some things from those pieces and then reworking them in my own way. So important to kind of refresh your, let's say, your inspiration wheel, right? So that you can keep new ideas flowing all the time. So I'm going to show you step by step how to do this in this module. All right. So here's the course curriculum. All right. So we're ready. This is going to be all these different topics that I just described, these Prelude 2 videos. This is going to be in week 1 of the masterclass. All right. Then in week 2, we're going to go over that ideas prelude in detail. So we're going to have a video on concepts. We're going to have a video on melody, on rhythm, on harmony, on timbre. We're going to have dedicated videos for each of these concepts, okay? Then we're going to do a whole week on writer's block, all right? How to tackle writer's block specifically. Then we're going to do a whole week on essentials. So we're going to have one video on writing tools, one video on hardware, one video on software, and go into each of these things in detail so that you can make a decision on what is best for you. I have my own recommendations, of course, but I want to make sure that this fits everybody's budget, especially at the various levels that you are at right now in your composition practice. Week 5 is going to be all about feedback, all right? External and internal feedback. We're going to cover strategies specifically related to those. And then week 6, you guessed it, that's going to be about score study. So we're going to do a whole week of score study and figure out exactly how to find scores, right? How to analyze scores and how to apply these scores to your own practice. And then, as you can imagine, this is going to keep on going. Week 7, we're going to go over instruments. Week 8, we're going to discuss form. Week 9, transitions, which is something that I feel like is very overlooked when we're talking about composition. And then week 10, week 11, week 12, we're going to keep adding more concepts, more master classes as we go through this course. All right. So this is going to be a continuous course. It doesn't just stop with week 9, week 10, etc. We're going to keep going until we basically run out of things to talk about. And guess what? We're never going to run out of things to talk about when it comes to composition. But I want to make sure that you at least have these building blocks, especially in these first 8, 9 weeks, so that you can feel confident and at least getting started composing at whatever level that you are right now. Okay. Now, who am I, right? Like I'm basically pontificating this entire time, but who am I exactly? Well, my name is Dr. Saad Haddad. I'm a professor at Columbia University and New Jersey City University. Those are the local universities where I am living right now in New Jersey. I teach composition, of course. I teach arranging, and I also teach a class called Music Humanities. That's the class, by the way, that I teach in a group format over at Columbia University. Really fun class because all the students that I have there are not music majors. So we get to discuss music on more of a kind of philosophical level, which I really enjoy. And then, of course, I teach composition at New Jersey City University as well as arranging, and I have a studio of private students as well. Okay. I'm a composer, right, as well. So I've had several dozen commissions and performances, hundreds of performances really, in North and South America, Europe and Asia, basically all over the world. As far as education goes, I have degrees from Columbia University. I have my DMA, which is a Doctor of Musical Arts in composition. From the Juilliard School, I have a Master's of Music in Composition. And from the University of Southern California, I have a Bachelor of Music in Composition. So basically a little bit overeducated for this particular practice, I feel like. But along the way, I figured out a lot of things that I didn't learn while I was at these 3 institutions. So I'm going to be sharing all of these things with you in this masterclass. So I'm really excited for that. Okay. And then, of course, on YouTube, if you're watching me here on YouTube, I've been giving away free resources, including tutorials, behind the scenes content, and I've been doing interviews with other composers. I've been doing this for basically 3 years now, since 2020, mid 2020, and I've been really happy to do it. It's amazing, and getting to interact with all of you has been really amazing, and learning also from you. So I am looking forward to continue doing this as well, because I just find this very fascinating to be sharing these kinds of things that I've learned over my last 10, 20 years of composing music. All right. Now, I know what it's like to struggle. So On the outside, I realize that it might not seem that I've ever struggled at all, but that's farther from the truth, okay? So I used to have paralyzing writer's block. During my undergraduate years at USC, it took me over 9 months to complete a 7-minute piece. This led to an all nighter fueled by energy drinks before the deadline, making me realize I couldn't keep composing that way. And this happened to be an orchestral piece called Maelstrom. And I remember the all-nighter that I spent. I was actually living in a fraternity apartment complex at this time. I was a sophomore, and there was a party going on outside and there was so much noise and all this stuff, but there wasn't really much I could do about it because, of course, um, I am, I signed up to be at this fraternity. I mean, it was great. I had a great time, but that night I wanted to be anywhere but there. And I realized that I couldn't just keep going like this. I couldn't just like leave it to the last moment to be writing music because in case I do encounter something like this, right, it's a little bit too late for me. So I needed to find a way to change my composing habits. So um, this is what kind of instigated that for me. Okay, imposter syndrome. So I felt like I was weaker than many of my peers at Juilliard while I was doing my master's, both graduate and undergraduate students, especially in musicianship skills. I struggled to play Bach chorales on the keyboard, read multiple clefs at once, and even sight sing basic tonal passages. These negative thoughts affected my creative work so much that I started making a list of pros and cons about transferring out of Juilliard. And this is the truth. I spent, the first couple of months at Juilliard, and I really didn't feel like I belonged at that time. And I actually went home and I had this list, and I wish I kept this list because I basically wrote down a list of pros and cons about staying at Juilliard and leaving Juilliard. And I remember at that time, the list for leaving Juilliard was much longer than the list for staying at Juilliard. But for whatever reason, I did stay. And I think part of it was that I knew that I was only going to be there for 2 years. And actually, I'm really glad that I stayed because over at Juilliard, I did learn a lot and I did push through and I did grow a lot as a person. So it was just those first couple of months that I was really feeling insecure, right? But I overcame that imposter syndrome, of course, as I went through. And being at a place like Juilliard helped a lot. But I want to share some things also that I learned to overcome that as we go through this masterclass. Okay. And the next thing is probably the worst thing. I lost passion. During my early years at Columbia University pursuing my doctorate in composition, I got stuck in a cycle of always trying to be productive. This made me fall out of love with composing. So once I got to Columbia, actually, I was I was working at all cylinders, right? I got over that imposter syndrome at Juilliard. I was being very creative. I was writing a lot of music at that time. And a lot of that music that I was writing at Juilliard, which was around 10 years ago or so, is still getting played today. So I was feeling really creative. The problem was that I was on this like hamster wheel of like one commission after another, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I realized that along the way I was thinking to myself, like, why am I actually doing this, right? Is it just to get that next dopamine hit, right? Like, why am I always trying to be productive? Like, what's the greater purpose of this, right? So I started to lose passion for composing, which was the hardest thing to get out of. The writer's block, I was able to have some strategies for that. Same with the imposter syndrome. But the passion, that one is really hard to get over, right? So these are going to be things that I want to share with you during the masterclass. And yeah, these are the things that I struggled with, and they were real struggles. These are not things that were made up or anything like that, and really not things that I talked about a lot with my own colleagues. I bottled a lot of these things up. Okay. Now, along the way, I figured things out, of course, right? I overcame many of these things to write a piece for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I was commissioned to write this 10-minute piece to open for violinist Hilary Hahn at Walt Disney Concert Hall. This was probably the most proud moment for me as far as my composition career because I am from Los Angeles, actually. And it was just really an amazing experience. I couldn't have done it without overcoming some of these struggles that I encountered in that last slide. I am currently the composer in residence with the California Symphony. I'm doing that all the way up to 2026. There, I'm being tasked to write 3 orchestral works and engage with their local community. So I already finished one of these pieces. This is called Mishwad, which you can find some videos on YouTube of me describing this particular piece. And then I'm also writing 2 other pieces for the orchestra. The next piece I'm writing is actually going to be a string orchestra piece. I've never written a string orchestra piece, so this is going to be an interesting opportunity for me just to dive into that genre. And then for the third piece, we're not really sure yet what that's going to be. That's going to be a little bit of a surprise for later on. And the nice thing about working with this particular symphony is that they have me engage with members of the community. So I went to various colleges and gave lectures. Um, I also went to this grade school and I talked to a bunch of like kindergartners, first graders that age. So for me, this was very interesting to actually show these kids like what a composer actually is and does in the 21st century, because oftentimes we think that a composer, right, this is going to be someone like Brahms or Bach or people like that, people that are long dead and people that get their music played all the time, of course, right? But there are still composers out there that are writing music today. So this composer in residency program is very interesting in that these folks in this community get to see a live composer, right? And also hear his thoughts and his music, of course. Okay. Fellowships, prizes, and honors. The Gadamus Award, which is an award given out in the Netherlands. It's an international award. The Charles Ives Fellowship, which is an American award. The Barlow Endowment, multiple ASCAP and BMI awards. I could have kept going, but I thought it was unnecessary. You can read my CV over on my website, www.saadandhaddad.com. I've won a lot of awards over the years, and each one came with a certain like prize, whether that be money or performance or just an honor. And these were accumulated over many, many years. Okay, so that's that as far as awards go. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one. What is a composer exactly, right? So, a composer, according to Merriam-Webster, is one that composes. Okay, well, that doesn't really tell us much. Okay, so what is to compose, right? Now, according to Merriam-Webster, to compose can mean to form by putting together, to produce, to create by mental or artistic labor. So that's getting kind of closer to what we might think a composer is. To formulate and write a piece of music, and to arrange in proper or orderly form. So this is very broad, right? Already we can say, oh, maybe composing is a lot more broad than just writing, dots on a piece of paper, right? For example, although that is one of the definitions they give, right? To formulate and write a piece of music. But all the other ones seem to be a lot more broad, okay? So I want to play a game. Right? Who would you consider to be a composer? Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples. So this is our friend, Johann Sebastian Bach. So composer, not a composer. I mean, he's even got the piece of paper in front of him, right, with the notes on. So, okay, that's it. That's a give me. Bach is a composer. Okay. What about this guy? Again, just like Bach, he's got that paper, that manuscript paper in his hand. He's even got his pen. Okay. Beethoven, composer. All right. What about this guy? Duke Ellington. All right. This is a well-known American jazz composer and arranger and pianist from the early 20th century. And he's known for not just his arrangements and his compositions, but also his improvisation, right? So I would say, okay, Duke Ellington, also a composer, right? He's also producing music as part of his craft. What about this person? Pinar Toprak, okay? This is a contemporary composer, media composer, and you can see in the background she's worked with Marvel, right? So she's a media composer and really well known for these kind of superhero type movies, Captain Marvel, right in the background of her, okay? What about this composer, Nina Shaker, okay? Nina Shaker, she is a graduate student at Princeton. She's doing her PhD. Really well known right now for writing orchestral music. She's worked with the New York Philharmonic, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and a bunch of other orchestras. And I've also interviewed her on my podcast. She is in my age group, let's say, and she's doing fantastic in the field, right? So this is going to be kind of a composer that's following the tradition of folks like Bach and Beethoven, kind of like what we think a composer might be, but she's kind of stretching also the norms of what a composer can be, right? So this is very interesting, at least for me to see happening in our 21st century world, okay? And last but not least, is this a composer? Kendrick Lamar, right? So Kendrick Lamar, one of the great hip hop artists of our time, right? And whether you know this or not, he is also someone that has been, uh, let's say, he's someone that has been recognized in academic composition circles. So he actually has a Pulitzer Prize to his name. So people like Aaron Copland had a Pulitzer Prize. People like Duke Ellington was posthumously given a Pulitzer Prize, actually, and a bunch of other composers. So Kendrick Lamar is interesting in that realm because he's not someone that you would think of in terms of Beethoven and Bach, maybe, but he was also recognized in those kind of circles. And in a lot of ways, when you look at his music too, this is really well produced music, right? It's really, when you look at the definition of what a composer is, I mean, Kendrick Lamar, he really checks all those boxes. So the reason for this slide here is to give you a broader overview, right, of what a composer can be. You don't need to necessarily be any of these types of people or follow any of these trajectories, right? But a composer really is somebody that produces music in some way, but puts music together in their mind and puts it out in the world. Okay, so this is a very broad definition. It's going to really help in terms of finding inspiration, right? Because inspiration doesn't just have to come from these like very classical scores, right? They can come from anywhere. Like my student Jude, he takes a lot of inspiration from Frank Zappa scores, right, and Frank Zappa music. So just want to keep that in mind as we go through this masterclass, because I will be covering a lot of stuff related to classical music, right? But I'd like you to apply that to your own interests as well. Okay. My interests outside of classical music, by the way, happen to be in the Arab Maqam, in this framework that a lot of Middle Eastern musicians follow. So I do have these kind of outside influences that don't follow any traditional Western Eurocentric norm. So again, I want you to think about this as you're going through this masterclass, okay? Now let's talk about how to get help. Now, once you're in the community, there's going to be many ways for you to actually get help in terms of questions that you want answered and in terms of feedback that you need on your pieces. So the very first way and the most direct way that you can do this is through the community tab. Now in the community tab, you can post any question that will either be answered by me or other members in our community. So think of this more like a Facebook group, right? That you post a question and then somebody from the group answers it, whether it's the admin, me, or whether it's anybody else in the group, right? So that's very much like what we're used to in terms of, let's say, a Facebook group, right? But this is a lot bigger than a Facebook group. I mean, honestly, it's insane. The more I think about it, it's so much more powerful than just a Facebook group or even a Discord server, okay? And I'm going to show you why. In our next tab is going to be the calendar tab, right? So in this tab, you'll notice that there are several office hour calls scheduled where you can ask your questions and receive feedback on your music in real time. This is a great way to connect with me and your fellow members. So I love these office hours because, I never really know who's going to be on one of these office hours, right? You can join all of them. You can join one of them. You can join half of them. It really depends on your schedule, but you will know that I will always be at that office hour. So you can schedule, your life around these office hours, or you can be like, hey, you know what? I can't do these next 2 weeks of office hours, but I can do the next 2 weeks, right? Or you know what? I don't really need feedback this week, but I need feedback next week. And you can basically plan around that. But you always know that I'll be there, right? I'll be at these office hours. So it's very similar to like when you go to school and you have a professor that has office hours at like 2 o'clock on a Tuesday every week, right? Except that I'm going to have a lot more than just one office hour per week, okay? So you can check with me multiple times per week, basically, as long as you're in this course community. So this, I feel like, is probably, the most powerful or one of the most powerful things that you will get out of being in this community course. And then we have our members tab. So in the members tab, you can chat directly with other members and even see who is presently online. So this is really cool because each member, you can see where they're from. So you can actually see if there's somebody from like a town that you're in, or maybe within an hour or so where you live, you can actually like chat with these folks and see if you can even meet in person, right? So see if there are other composers in your area. And I find that at least a lot of the composers I work with, they don't know other composers, right? And I think it's a really powerful thing to actually have them meet in person, or at the very least chat online with composers from around the world that are in the group, okay? Now let's summarize everything that we've learned today, okay? So who is this course for? This course is for beginners needing step-by-step guidance on musical ideas, hobbyists seeking faster development, grade school undergraduate students combining technical and real-world skills, and professionals or graduate students covering advanced topics like commissions and marketing, right? So it's basically almost for everybody, right? But there are going to be different modules, of course, that correspond more to what you need. But I recommend that you watch all of them so that you can fill every gap that you might have as a composer, okay? Now, the course curriculum. Week 1 includes a welcome lesson, that's the one you're watching now, as well as lessons on ideas, writer's block, essentials, feedback, and score study. There will be several other weeks of topics added as we go along, including topics related to structure, transitions, and many more. So this is not a fixed course, right? We're going to front end all the really important stuff that you need to know, but as we go along, we're going to be adding more weeks of things that pertain to us as composers and things that we might want to learn more specifically about, right? And a lot of that is going to be based on what the community wants as well, right? Like what does the community want to learn next, right? Not just simply a syllabus that your instructor gives you, right? That's no fun at all. Imagine having a course where you actually decide what you want to learn and you have it all in one spot with community members that are all learning alongside with you, and everybody giving each other feedback. This creates kind of an insane feedback loop, right? Which we're going to talk about in a future module. Okay. Who am I? I'm a composer who loves helping other composers. So if I were to just have one sentence that summarizes everything I do, I really believe in this facet of like giving back, and I've been doing that for years on this YouTube channel, as well as teaching in person at the various universities I teach at, right? So I love helping other composers and seeing how far they go in their craft. In my opinion, I've been blessed to be writing a lot of different commissions and things like that, but for whatever reason, it's this act of helping other composers realize their ideas that for whatever reason, I get more from that than hearing a piece of mine, believe it or not, these days. So of course, I'm continuing to write commissions. I'm very excited by that as well, but this whole facet of helping other composers, achieve things that they thought they couldn't achieve, this is very exciting for me. As someone that's been composing for over 20 years, okay? We talked about what is a composer, right? So really, again, if we just put it down to a few words, right? The essentials, anyone that creates sound, right? Anyone that creates sound, that's a composer, okay? And we'll talk more about that as we go along. And how to get help. So once you're in the community course, right, you can use the community tab to post questions for me or other members. You can use the calendar tab to join scheduled office hour calls for real-time feedback. So that's very powerful. And the members tab is used to chat directly with other members and see who's online, okay? And of course, there's also a classroom tab. That's where all these modules are. So there are basically 4 tabs in this Composer's Brain community course. And I want to leave you with this quote by our friend here, Ludwig van Beethoven. To play a wrong note is insignificant. To play without passion is inexcusable. So what does Beethoven here mean by this, right? Now, what I think he means is that we shouldn't strive for perfectionism, right? We're learning. We're constantly learning, right? So we shouldn't worry too much about doing things the right way, right? As long as we're doing these things, right? And that if you're going along the route here of writing music, right? The worst thing that you can do, right? These are one of the things I struggled with, by the way, is losing passion. Like that is inexcusable, right? You can write as many correct notes as possible, right? But if you don't have any passion for those notes, you're not going to feel good after writing that music or while you're writing that music. So what's even the point of all that? Okay. So I think this is really important as like a general high level thing to think about as we're going through this masterclass. All right. So let's go out there and compose. Every single composition that you've ever heard in your life started with an idea. So in this video, we're going to cover what is an idea, okay? Like what makes an idea an idea? I know it sounds basic, but we really have to go to the heart of it, okay? What are the types of ideas that you can have? Musically speaking, what are the ideas that you can have, okay? So let's get right into it. So this is going to be our prelude to ideas. In a future module, we're going to discuss ideas more in depth, but I want to give you an overview. So here's what we're going to cover in today's lesson. What is an idea? So we're going to go right at the heart of it from the get-go. And in terms of a musical idea, what about rhythm? Is that an idea, right? Melody, harmony, timbre. And then we're going to have a summary at the very end. Again, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts for exclusive content. And those are all my handles right there. Share the course. Let's spread our love of composing. Warning, this is the most important video in the entire course so far. Watch the entire video. Don't skip. Don't fast forward. Okay. And pro tip, watch the video in 2x speed unless there is music playing, and there is some music playing in this lesson. So what is an idea? Okay. An idea is just two things: an extra musical concept or a musical thought. Okay. So in terms of an extra musical concept, inspiration from outside of music that can influence a composition. These include emotions, stories, visual art, nature, historical events, literature, or philosophical ideas. By using extra musical concepts, composers can create deeper connections and evoke specific images or narratives in their music. We'll go over this more in depth in next week's module, okay? So in terms of ideas, right, we can start with an idea that has nothing to do with music, right? There are plenty of pieces in the repertoire that are like this. You can think of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. You could think of Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. Even in my music, I have many recent pieces that don't have anything to do with music as the impetus for their creation. The piece that I composed for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, it's called Aishin, which means living in Arabic. I mean, that in and of itself has nothing to do with music. I composed another piece very recently called Mishwad for orchestra, and that had to do with a trip that I took up and down the coast of California. So again, you don't need to have a strictly musical idea to get something going. Even something that is kind of from your own life experiences, right? These extra musical concepts, this can be the jump start to your composition, okay? Now, besides the extra musical concepts, of course, we could have a musical thought be the impetus for a piece. So a musical thought, this is a process that guides the creation of music, okay? It involves how composers think about rhythms, melodies, harmonies, and timbre. Musical thoughts shape how music is composed, interpreted, and understood, providing the foundation for creativity and expression within a composition. Next week, we'll explore all the different types of musical thoughts in detail. For now, let's take a quick look at each of these elements. So next week, what we'll be doing is talking about each of these musical thoughts that I've been mentioning: rhythm, melody, harmony, and timbre. Each one of these things will get its own video lesson. But for now, I want to introduce you to some of the types of things that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about musical thoughts that have to do with our music, okay? So we don't have to be thinking about all these things, all right? You can be thinking about an extra musical concept first. You can be thinking about a musical thought first. You can think about these two things in combination, right? But we don't want to go crazy. We don't want to think about everything all at once. But I want to show you all the different things that you could be thinking about, right? As options, right? Because I feel like sometimes when we're composing, we have tunnel vision. We think, okay, what's going to be my melody that I want to hear, right? And this is sometimes, you can't come up with a melody, right? Maybe you can only come up with a harmony at that particular moment. Or maybe it's a timbre, or maybe it's just something as simple as a rhythm, Or maybe it's none of those things at all. Maybe it's just an extra musical concept, right? So it's really important to be aware, like on a high level, what all these musical thoughts that you can have are in combination with the extra musical concepts, if that's something that you want to implement into your music, okay? So let's talk about rhythm, okay? So rhythm is the pattern of sounds and silences in music organized in time. It is what makes music move and flow, giving it structure and a sense of timing. Rhythm involves the duration of notes and rests, the pace, tempo of the music, and the placement of accents and beats. It is one of the fundamental elements of music, driving the energy and pulse that listeners perceive and respond to. So there's a lot to unpack in just that one definition of rhythm, right? Of course, we have this idea of pattern, right? Pattern recognition, okay? We're also going to hear rhythms later on that don't have any sort of patterns, right? So it can be pattern or the absence of pattern, right? This thing, of course, sounds, we can interpret sounds of rhythm, of course. We know what that means when we say sound of rhythm. But what about the silences in between the sounds? That's just as important when we're talking about rhythm, okay? This idea of organization in time, these things have to be organized in time, right? This idea of the rhythm having this kind of pace, a tempo, okay? That's very important. And this idea at the very end that they're saying, or that I'm saying rather, this idea of energy, right? And this idea of pulse. Or what about the absence of energy and pulse, right? Just like in terms of silence, right? So we need to think about all these things when we're thinking about rhythm from a high level, okay? And there's also this idea of meter, okay? Which relates directly to this idea of accents and beats and this idea of tempo, okay? The meter is the pattern of beats in music, organized into regular groups called measures or bars. It determines the rhythmic structure of a piece, indicating how many beats are in each measure and which beats are emphasized. Common meters include 4/4, 3/4, 6/8, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on like that. So really important to differentiate rhythm and meter. Rhythm, I like to think of rhythm as being these kind of like ephemeral uh, ideas that you have that kind of exist in their own plane, whereas meter is where all those kind of little ideas happen on a global scale, okay? And there's some music that doesn't have any meter at all, right? A lot of non-Western music doesn't have a sense of meter. So you don't have to have meter in a piece, but it's good to know from a high level perspective, okay, is this piece going to have a meter, right? Is it going to have a pulse-based rhythm or not? And how does that fit within the meter? So this is something that we'll talk about in a future lesson. But this module here that we're discussing, we really want to give you like every kind of bit of information that we can so that you can make a decision on how to approach your next composition, okay? So let's hear three kinds of rhythms, okay? Just to give you an idea of how I'm interpreting rhythm and what are the different kinds of rhythms that we can have, okay? So this is just three rhythms, okay? So it's non-exhaustive, of course. So here's our first example. This is by our friend Ludwig van Beethoven. This is from the second movement of his Seventh Symphony from 1812. This is going to be an excerpt of low strings within a full orchestra, okay? So this is what the score looks like here. And what I like to do before analyzing any score, right? And we'll talk about analysis a bit later in this course, is I like to look at it first before I listen, right? I don't want the listening to have a judgment first on me, right? I want to look at the score. So I'm looking at the score and I can already see I have yum, bum, bum, yum, bum. And I see already that is a cell, that is a pattern. And I know that's a pattern because it repeats right after that. So if I look at the next bar, yum, bum, ba, yum, bum, right here. And then again, yum, yup, bum, bum, bum. And then at the very end, look at breaks. Yum, bum, ba, dum. Rest, right? So it looks like it's the same as it was before, but there's a rest on that very last beat. So let's take a listen to this now that we've done kind of like this high level analysis of it. Very basic, but I want to just show you that, yes, we're identifying patterns, but then the pattern breaks at the very end. Okay, let's take a listen. Okay. So again, we are getting used to that pattern, right? Yum, bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-ba-dum, ba-yum, bum, ba-dum, ba-da, ba-ba-dum. Oh, there we didn't hear it. We expected a note there, but it was silence. So it's interesting. This idea of sound versus silence, really, really crucial when we're talking about rhythm within the span of this 2/4 meter, right? These 2 beats per bar, okay? So something to think about when we think about rhythm is this idea of pattern recognition, okay? And we'll see that also when we talk about melody, harmony, and timbre later in this video lesson. It's so crucial to think about pattern recognition and then the absence of pattern, this idea of expecting something, and then this idea of, okay, giving the audience what they don't expect, you know? So this few seconds here, really crucial in demonstrating that facet, right? So we're learning about rhythm here, but we're also learning about psychology, okay? Just with, we didn't even talk about pitches or chords or orchestration, timbre, any of that stuff, right? We're just talking about rhythm, okay, in terms of these different things. Okay, here's another rhythm. This is by our friend Bela Bartok. This is his Concerto for Orchestra, second movement from about the mid 1940s. This is a snare drum solo within full orchestra, okay? So again, we're going to take a look at it first before we listen to it. So again, this is in 2/4, right? The meter is in 2/4, 2 beats per measure. And again, this is a brief excerpt. We can see that it's at quarter equals 94, so it's about a moderate tempo. Okay, it says allegro scherzando, but 94 is not that fast, okay? And if you take a look at the Beethoven, right, in comparison to this, there are some patterns, right? If we're gonna sing this out loud, ta, ta ta ta, ta 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 ta, ta 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 ta. There are patterns. We can sense that it's all part of the same music, but it's not as it's not as similar to each other as the Beethoven is, right? We do have these accents on the first beat in the first 3 bars, but then look at the fourth measure. The accent happens on the second beat, and then on the next measure, the accent happens again on the second beat. But then in the very last measure, there are no accents at all. And in fact, there's nothing on the downbeats, right? There's nothing on beat 1 or beat 2. So there is this kind of like this integration of the rhythm as it's happening, but it's happening very gradually over time, right? So the Beethoven example, that disintegration happened on the very last measure, but here it's happening slowly over time. So you see how rhythm and meter can be related, right? There is this psychology that's happening, and we're thinking of the listener, by the way, actively in this. Even though this music is music, let's say, that is not in the top 40 or whatever, you know, this is not music, obviously, that most people are listening to. We are still thinking about psychology in terms of how is this going to affect a listener? And of course, that listener starts with you. That starts with you recognizing these patterns and this integration of patterns. Okay, so without further ado, let's listen to this. Okay, so we can hear, right, that it is all very similar. There are patterns within each of these meters that are continuing, right? But it's not consistent the way the Beethoven is. Rather, it's a disintegration, a slow disintegration over time, okay? And even myself listening to this back again, when I'm looking at measures 4 and 5, I actually see it, those 2 bars repeated exactly. And I haven't heard this at all in this entire excerpt. I hear da 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 da. So actually, even the repetition in the middle of the phrase is unexpected, because I would have thought that it would keep disintegrating over time. But in that brief moment in the fourth and fifth measure, this actually repeats, right? It didn't repeat at all before and doesn't repeat at all after. So very, very interesting. I think that just in these 2 examples, you have a very different outlook on how we can tackle this idea of rhythm and meter, right? And this idea of psychology of these things, okay? So rhythm, again, very important idea. Let's listen to another example here, or take a look at another example. This is by Lisa Lim. an elemental thing from 2017, so much more recent piece. And this is just for solo wood block, okay? So I want to give you an example, and you're going to see very shortly here. There it is. This is going to be a very, very different example than the previous two that I showed you. And before we hear it, of course, we need to take a look at it. So like, what exactly is going on here? So of course, this is going to be a very different piece, very modern piece. We have different aesthetic, of course. But if you just take a look at it globally, right, we're at a slow tempo, quarter equals 50. It's in 4/4, so there is a meter, right? But there is no discernible pattern going on. There's nothing repeated, right? Like we had in the Bartok example and the Beethoven example, right? There's no repetition there. And in terms of like feeling if it's in 4/4 or not, there's no indication that we are in 4/4 really. I mean, we have a downbeat on the first bar, and then we kind of have a downbeat on the second bar, but again, there's these tapped nails thing that are tying over to the first bar, to the second bar rather. So it's very, very hard to discern metrically what's going on. But at the same time, this composer is creating a landscape, right? And this is, by the way, the very first two bars of the piece. So she's creating this landscape of what we as listeners should expect. So rather than hearing like a pattern, let's say, I believe this composer is trying to create like an atmosphere. Like we're not supposed to be tapping our foot like we are in the Bartok and the Beethoven. We're supposed to just take in these sounds as they unfold. Okay. And there might be areas in the piece later on where you can detect patterns and this integration of the patterns and so on. But at least for now, in these first two bars, Liza Lim does not set this up at all. Okay. There is none of that going on. Okay. So let's take a listen to this. Right. So we can't really detect any sort of rhythmic pattern going on, and even within the meter we can't really detect. If I didn't see the score, right, I wouldn't probably know that it was in 4/4. So again, these are extreme. This is on the extreme end, right? But I want you to kind of get an idea that yes, something like this is also possible within this span of rhythm, within this parameter of rhythm, right? There is this kind of extreme on one side, the Beethoven, right, which has this kind of very regular pulse, and when it went against the pulse, it was just, or rather against the rhythmic cell, it was just a silence at the very end. It was like the least he could have possibly done to change what the rhythm is. With the Bartok, there was this gradual disintegration, and with here, there was a disintegration from the very beginning. Like the very first sound is right at the very first sound that Lim makes, there's a disintegration of rhythm. So whether you go with the limb approach, right, this kind of very off the meter, off the grid kind of approach, right, where you don't have a sense of pulse at all, or the Bartok Beethoven approach, or really anything in between, I just want you to have an idea that these are all possible within music, right? And it's really important for you to decide when you're thinking about rhythm, which way you want to go, or do you want to go somewhere in between, right? So it's important just to know what's possible, okay? So let's move on now to melody. This is the next really important parameter of music, okay? And when I think about melody, I think of melody more as a pyramid, okay? So let me show you what I mean here. So on the very bottom of my melody pyramid, I have, of course, this melody, okay? It's very creative, right? But on the bottom, I believe that melody, this idea of melody, encapsulates this entire pyramid. Let me show you what I mean. So to me, melody is any number of successive pitches occurring in time. Okay? So melody is not like just like like a theme or thing or something like this, something that you just remember, okay? To me, melody is actually a lot more broad than that. And that's why it's on the bottom of my melody pyramid here. Melody encapsulates anything that you play, basically on the piano, or on the clarinet, or on your voice, or the synthesizer, anything that has a successive number of pitches as an independent line occurring in time, no matter if it's 2 seconds long, 1 second long, if it's 15 minutes long, right? As long as you have any number of successive pitches occurring in time, that to me is a melody. And I really like this idea because it makes it more broad to me. Like, what can I actually do with an independent line, right? I'm not just thinking in like a very narrow-minded way. I'm thinking more broadly, okay? Now, again, on this bottom part of the pyramid, this encapsulates everything that occurs in the middle and at the top of the pyramid, okay? So again, our melody pyramid. Now, the next thing in our melody pyramid is what we would probably think of, like colloquially, when we think of melody. We think of a tune, okay? So what is a tune? A tune is a singable. It's complete in itself with a beginning, middle, and end, okay? So when we think of a tune, we can think of many, many tunes right in our head. When we've been to a movie, we can go out of the theater and start singing a tune. When we're singing a song from the top 40 on the radio, all of those, most of those, let's say, have tunes, right? So this is going to be singable, complete in itself with a beginning, middle, and end. And oftentimes it's very memorable, okay? So, and by the way, this is a melody as well, right? It falls within this bottom definition of it having any number of successive pitches occurring in time, right? So it belongs on this melody pyramid, okay? So very important to think like, what do you want to do with melody? Do you want to have kind of a broader melody that's not particularly singable, right? That's not complete in itself, doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Maybe it's not memorable. So I want you to have this concept that you don't really need it to be a tune, right? You can have something broader than that, right? And it's okay. That could be the musical idea that you have, the melodic idea that you have. Doesn't necessarily need to be like, why does it need to be singable, complete in itself, have a beginning, middle, and end? Like, why does it have to have that, right? It could have that if you want to have it, right? That is an option, right, on the melody pyramid, but it doesn't have to, right? So I just want you to keep that in mind. And my last part of the melody pyramid is motive, okay? Motive, this is going to be a small number of notes that recur throughout a piece of music. So we think of a motive, there's lots of things that we can think of, like the most the most basic example of motive that I can think of is like, for example, the Jaws motive, dee-dum, dee-dum, or even Beethoven Symphony Number 5. We think of ba-da-da-da, right? Small number of notes that recur in a type of piece. But again, notice how this is part of the melody pyramid in that it has a certain number of successive pitches occurring in time. And it has some elements of tune as well in that it's singable, and it's memorable, okay? It's not complete. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end like a tune does, right? But it has some of those qualities that a tune has. And of course, it is a type of melody. So this is our melody pyramid here, okay? So let's hear 3 kinds of melodies, okay? So here's our first one. This is from Henry Purcell's Dido's Lament, from Dido and Aeneas. This is from 1688, so quite far back in time. This is for solo soprano and orchestra. And again, we're going to take a look at the score before we listen to it. So when we see the score here, I just laid out for you the melody, and this also happens to have a text, okay? So when we take a look at this melody, right, we can actually kind of decide for ourselves, is this a melody, a broader melody? Is this a tune, or is this a motive? And quite clearly, we can see this is not a motive, right? And in terms of is this a tune or a melody, it is hard to differentiate for now, but we'll see, especially when we get to the melody module later on. We're going to see like what makes something a tune versus a general melody, right? And it's hard to figure that out right at this stage, but we could figure that out when we listen to it or sing it back, okay? So let's take a listen to this excerpt from Dido's Lament. Okay, so now that we've heard it, we can make some, like, again, high level analysis of what we just heard. So in the first 4 bars, we can say that that's definitely a phrase right there. When I am laid in earth, That part right there, we can hear that as a phrase, okay? That seems to be the beginning of the tune, right? If the tune has a beginning, middle, and end, right? We can sort of discern, oh, that's the beginning of a tune, right? So that's what I mean by beginning, middle, and end. Then this part, may my wrongs create no trouble. That part right there, from like bars 5 through 8, that seems to be the middle of the tune, right? We can discern, oh, that seems to be the middle, right? It's not something that we're doing by any music theoretical way, right? We're doing this by ear. And then this last part, no trouble in thy breast, that seems to be the ending, right? So we can hear this is a tune. It's complete in itself. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. Um, it's singable. Obviously, there's somebody singing that, right? But if we didn't know just from hearing somebody sing it, it could be singable with a trumpet player or a clarinet player or even a violinist or even a pianist, right? We can tell that it's singable just by the range. So a lot of it is stepwise. There's very few skips, right? There's very few leaps in this, right? And that also helps making it more singable, right? So you'll see that by looking at a lot of different melodies, right? We can discern, oh, is this a melody? Is this a tune? Is this a motive, right? And we can start borrowing these little bits of tenets that we're just talking about right now, even with just this one tune. We can start saying, oh, these are the different kinds of things that I'm noticing about this. I wonder how I can incorporate it in one of my tunes, right? So, really, really important. And when we go on to score study, we'll take a look at more how to do this, but I just want to give you a little taste of it now with this melodic excerpt. Let's listen to another melody, okay? This is going to be from our friend Peter Tchaikovsky, one of his most famous melodies. Okay, this is Swan Lake, Opus 20A from Scene 1. 1876, so a little bit further in time. This is going to be the oboe solo within the full orchestra. And it's very interesting. This particular excerpt, when I had my premiere with the LA Philharmonic last year, my piece opened the concert, and then we had the Hilary Hahn Sibelius Violin Concerto, which also has a lot of really famous tunes. But then after intermission, we had excerpts from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, and I heard this oboe solo live actually while I was sitting in rehearsal. It's just so amazing. Like I never get tired of this melody, and yeah, I want to show it to you. So let's take a. I'm not even going to do an analysis right now. Let's just take a listen to it. I mean, it doesn't get really much better than that when you think of a tune, right? It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. You can definitely sing it back, and it's very, very memorable, okay? And this tune in particular has a lot of pattern recognition, right? We talk about pattern recognition, which we started talking about a little bit with rhythm. This has a lot of that going on. You just look at that first bar of the melody, there's a half note, okay? Then you have 4/8 notes. So this sets you up for the entire tune, actually. Okay. The second bar, dotted quarter note with an eighth note, then a dotted quarter note with an eighth note again. And then you look at the next bar, dotted quarter note with an eighth note. Then you get the 4/8 notes in a row that we heard from the first bar. And it's actually located in the same part of the meter, in this 4/4 meter, as we heard it in the first bar. So it's really, really interesting how he creates this like kind of pattern recognition sandwich, let's say, right? With the 4/8 notes from that first bar of the melody kind of being let's say, the bread, right? The top piece of bread. Then the ya da 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 da. That part is like the meat of it. And then you got the bottom piece of the sandwich, right? Ya da da da. That part is the bottom piece of the bread. So it's complete, even within the part of the tune, right? Just like the first 3 bars of the tune, it's complete in itself, and that's why I love this tune so much, right? Then we get to the next measure, right? This is going to be measure 5 in the excerpt. We have a half note tied to an eighth note. Okay, so it's our first time seeing a tied note, And this is also the first time we don't hear beat 3, which is considered a strong beat in 4/4. Then we get our 3/8 notes. So the 3/8 notes continue from that 4/8 note pattern, right? But we don't hear all 4/8 notes. We hear the last 3/8 notes. So again, like the Bartok example, this disintegration of rhythm over time, Tchaikovsky is doing the same thing here, but with melody and rhythm. It's so it when you look at it, it's so simple, but when you start recognizing these things, it's going to start changing how you think as a composer. Again, the title of this course, The Composer's Brain, right? This is exactly what I'm talking about, and it gets me so excited just talking about it because and to share it with you because these are things that I was discovering on my own, away from any music theory class or any orchestration class. This is what is going to start getting those synapses in your brain to start recognizing these things. And then look at this at the very end of the tune here, starting from bar 6 to the end. Look at this. It's a rehash of the beginning. So you have a half note, 4/8 notes, just like you have on bar 2. Then you have it's a mirror, so or it's a copy. Then you have in bar 7, it's the same as bar 3, right? And then bar 8 is the same as bar 4. Okay. Then the next bar, the very last bar, is a dotted half note, which is 1/8 note longer than measure 5, which is a half note tied to an eighth note, right? So we see the beginning, we see the middle, and we see the end. And even at the end, there's this very slight variation. He just makes that half note that's tied to an eighth note a tiny bit longer by adding an eighth note, right? So it's so subtle, but all these little subtleties that add up to create one of the most memorable tunes probably ever created by a Western composer. Okay, so I love this melody so much, and I was really honored to share a program with this melody. I mean, what could be better, right? So okay, let's move on to the next melody here. So this is going to be from one of my favorite composers. This is Giacinto Scelsi. This is going to be his 4 pieces for trumpet solo from 1956. Okay, so if you just take a look at this, it's again like the limb example that I showed in the rhythm slide. This is going to be a little bit more out of left field, let's say, but there's going to be a lot of elements that you can recognize in terms of pattern recognition. Okay, and and in terms of identifying, is this a melody, is it a tune, right? It's going to be a little bit more squirrely, right? It's not as tune based as, let's say, the Tchaikovsky. I mean, that really felt like a tune. So let's take a listen to this Chelsea excerpt for solo trumpet. I wanted it to continue a little bit after you heard the excerpt that's on the screen here, but even with this type of melody, we are getting back always to that B. We hear B as the center. So you see, a lot of times we start noodling around B, we get back to B, we go below B, we go above B. And even though there's a lot of these ornamentations and decorations, and even though we don't even have a sense of meter at all, like there's no meter identified here, our ear catches that, hey, we're going back to B. We're going back to B. Maybe you can't sing it back to me, right? Which is, again, totally we don't have to come up with tunes, right? But there is something in it, in this melody, that gets our brain to latch onto it. And I believe in this case, it's that always striving to get back to B, always striving to get back to B. And even when we go to the second system here, in the middle of the second system, notice how it jumps up to E. It jumps up a fourth to E. And this is very akin, like if you studied music theory, right? Very akin to like going to the dominant or the fourth or the, of a scale, right? This is something that we see in a lot of traditional music, okay? And he does this here by going up to that E and trying to hit that E again and again, but then he goes back to the home key of B. So even though it's not a tune like the Tchaikovsky or even the Purcell, right? We can still gravitate towards a melody like this. It's a different kind of melody, a different type of experience, right? But we can still gravitate towards something like this, and this might be something that we'd like to do, right? It has more complexity, it has more variation. There's definitely a different kind of mood, different kind of atmosphere a piece like this is trying to set, right? And you can even go further than this. I mean, this is just one example, just because I love this example of a melody that doesn't necessarily have to be a tune, right? But I wanted to show you an example of something that could happen that's a little bit outside the box. Okay, so those are our melodies. Let's move on to harmony, okay? Harmony, another musical concept that we're going to be thinking about, or musical thought, rather. So harmony is any number of pitches that occur simultaneously, all right? So again, like what I was talking about with melody, right? That melody is any successive number of pitches that occur in time. Harmony is any number of pitches that occur simultaneously, that occur at the same time. So I don't care whether it sounds pleasing to the ear, whether it doesn't sound pleasing to the ear. I don't care if it's 2 notes at the same time. I don't care if it's 1,000 notes at the same time. All of those are types of harmony, and all of those should be considered, okay? Now, there is consonance when we think about harmony, right? There's levels of consonance. Consonance is a combination of notes that sound pleasant together, right? When writing music, consonance is used to create a sense of stability and resolution, right? And consonances, usually when we talk about consonances, we think about unisons, we think about the octave, we think about the perfect fifth, we think about the major third. In some instances, we think about the perfect fourth, and to a lesser degree, we think about the minor third, and so on, and some types of sixths as well. So consonance is that kind of like feeling of stability. Okay, so you can have a piece that has just consonances, right? Just purely consonances, and that's it. Whatever consonance means to you, right? Depending on what, I'm not going to get into it, but depending on what era you're in, consonants could mean a different set of intervals, right? But generally speaking, we're talking about unisons, octaves, fifths, and thirds and sixths, and to some degree the fourth, okay? Dissonance. So harmony can have a level of dissonance. A dissonance is a combination of notes that clash or create a sense of tension and instability. When writing music, dissonance is used to add drama, express emotions, or create a sense of unresolved tension that seeks resolution. So it's really important to have dissonance actually in a piece of music. It's actually crucial. Otherwise, it doesn't create that forward momentum that we need to go from A to B to C to D to Z in a piece of music. Just having a piece of music with strictly consonants, I mean, this is not a type of music that, let's say, drives from one to the next, right? Think about your own life. Imagine if it was just roses and peaches and cream, or imagine if you're just eating ice cream all day, right? Like you would get sick, right? You would get sick of that, you know? Imagine just eating your favorite food every single hour of the day or every day of your life, right? You know, at some point, you're going to want to try something new or want to try something outside your comfort zone. And then you can go back to your favorite flavor of ice cream, right? So dissonance is that kind of friction that we all need in life, whether we want it or not, right? We all need it, right? So that we can grow and we can get to the next step. And it's the same thing in music. We need a level of dissonance, okay? We need some kind of level of dissonance, even if it's just a slight dissonance, right? Even if it's slight. And in basically every genre of Western music, we have dissonance. And in a non-Western music as well, we have levels of dissonance, okay? It might be not be the type of dissonance that you might think. It's not, I'm not talking about atonal or, you know, what we think of as modern music dissonance, which is what we can't think of that as well. I'm thinking of levels of dissonance, right? There's a spectrum of dissonance that we can have, and the same thing with consonants, okay? So let's again hear 3 types of harmonies so that you can get an idea of what kind of musical thoughts one might have, right, in terms of harmony, okay? So let's take a look at our first harmony here. This is by our friend Dufay. This is Ave Maria Stella from 1440. This is a hymn for 3 voices, and if you take a look at this score right here, don't be alarmed by the strange looking notation in terms of the clefs and the meter. The meter is just basically a 3/2 bar, Okay, so we have 3 half notes per bar. That's it. And then the treble clefs that you see on the left hand side. At the left hand side, you see the top voice, which is just it's what you see is what you get. The middle voice there, the kind of tenor voice, this is going to be sounding an octave lower than what you see. And same thing with the bottom voice, this kind of bass voice. What you see there, what is what the player is going to sing, but you're gonna hear it down an octave. Okay, so when you hear this excerpt, you'll see, oh, those middle voice and that bottom voice is sounding an octave below. Okay, but if you just again looking at this first before we listening to it and trying to see what the chord makeup is, right? Let's just look at the first measure. Okay, the first measure we have in the bottom D. The next voice we have A. The top voice we have D. So basically we have a perfect fifth on the bottom, and on the top we have a fourth. Okay, so the level of consonance is quite high on this very first part of the music. Then the next note rather, we have A in the bottom voice. Then we have C in the next voice, so that's a minor third. Okay, so a little bit, it's not as constant, right, as the first beat. And then above that, we have F, which is a perfect fourth above. So this is a high level of consonance too on this beat. And then the very next beat we have on the bottom again, we have B, then we have D, again a third, and then above that we have from D to G, that's a fourth. So again, a high level of consonance, and you'll notice that in this entire excerpt, there is a relatively high level of consonance here, at least to our modern ears, and that has to do a lot with the time. You know, we're dealing with the 1440s here. This is relative to our ears, a high level of consonance. We're going to hear a lot of unisons, octaves, fifths, fourths, thirds, sixths, that kind of thing. So let's take a listen. And it goes on and on like that. Mhm. And it ends again on that kind of perfect fifth sonority that we got in the beginning. So again, we are dealing with a high level, relatively high level of consonance, right? On that consonance dissonance spectrum, we can hear that it's closer to the consonance level, okay, in terms of harmony. So you can have harmonies like this, of course, and a lot of these harmonies come from this time period, okay, especially with this kind of 3-part or 4-part vocal music. In this case, we have 3 parts. Okay, let's take a look at the next harmony. This is a harmony by our friend Chopin. This is 24 Preludes, Opus 28, number 4 from 1839. This is for solo piano. And if we take a look at this, right, this has, of course, a very clear melodic line at the top. But let's focus on the bottom line. This is the left-hand line, okay? On the bottom, we can see that it's actually very consistent in terms of how many pitches there are in the harmony. So again, like the Do-Fi example, there were 3 pitches in each of the harmonies. Here we also have 3 pitches in each of the harmonies. That doesn't always mean you need to have 3 pitches. It just happened to be that these are the 2 examples that I picked. But take a look at the harmony just seeing it before we hear it. Look at that very first bar. We have G, B, and E, right? So again, we have a third, and we have a fourth on top of that, right? This is going to be a minor chord, an E minor chord, okay? But more importantly, as we get to that second measure, look what's happening. The E is staying the same, right? But then the bottom 2 voices are going down by a step. So there's this voice leading pattern where one of the notes stays the same, but the other 2 go down by a step. So it's very slight, right? And then on beat 3 of that very same bar, the E moves down as well to E flat. So there's this gradual descension that's happening here. And when we get to the next bar, right, this is going to be bar 3. Look, that F sharp on the bottom, right? Remember, there's a key signature here, F sharp. The F sharp goes down to F natural on beat 1, while the A and the E flat stay the same. So look, there is a pattern going on here in terms of the harmony, at least in these first few bars or so, or actually rather in the entire excerpt. There's a pattern of a descension in the voice leading, in the harmony, right? So there is an overall musical thought going on here in the Chopin. So not just, okay, let's pick E minor. Oh, let's pick this chord. Let's pick this chord. No, that's not how Chopin is thinking about this, right? He's thinking about it in terms of this overall musical concept, right? That he's dealing with specifically with harmony, right? Not necessarily in terms of even rhythm, right? Because the rhythm is quite simple. It's just a bunch of eighth notes, right? With timbre, it's just a piano, right? With melody, he's got that covered in another hand, right? He's dealing with harmony in terms of what do I want the harmony to do overall? I want it to descend gradually over time. So again, if we stay with that bar, measure 3, we have F, A, E flat. We go to beat 3, the E flat slides down to D, right? While the other two stay the same. Then we have the A sliding down to G sharp, right, in beat 4. And then the F natural slides down to E natural in measure 4, beat 1. So again, these very slight changes, right? And he doesn't do it all at the same time. It's not like he's taking a chord like this and then moving it all three voices at the same time, right? He's doing it gradually over time. And this is his concept, right? This is his harmonic concept for this piece, that he has this problem in his head. He said, how do I make a harmony just descend? I want this like descending thing over time. How do I do it, right? And rather than thinking about, okay, I'm going to have a 1 chord, then I'm going to have a 4 chord, then I'm going to have a 5 chord, he's thinking of more like, okay, how do the individual voices change over time? So again, another way to think about harmony. Let's listen to it. Right? So beautiful. There is a lot of dissonance as well in this too, right? So it's not just complete consonance. There's a lot of dissonance. Just look at, for example, you look at the second bar, right? Second bar, beat 3. We have F sharp, A, which is a minor third, and then from A to E flat, it's a tritone, which is like the devil's interval, right? So there is a sense of dissonance there, okay? And then if you look at the very next bar, beat 1, right? We have F natural on the bottom, right? And from F natural to E flat, this is a minor seventh, right? Which is another level of dissonance. And then we still have that A and E flat tritone, right, in there. So there is a lot of dissonance in here. And if we keep continuing on, even the end of measure 3 into measure 4, 5, there's a level of dissonance here that's definitely, when we look at that consonance dissonance spectrum, this is definitely closer to the dissonance side, right, versus the do-fi. Okay, so something to think about, that there is a level of consonance and dissonance when we're thinking about harmony, and then we're thinking about what is like the overall concept when we're thinking about this harmonic parameter. Okay, next. This is by a former Columbia classmate of mine. This is Sky McClay. Many cadences from 2015. This is for string quartet. And this is probably, I would say, I didn't even realize this is from 2015. So it's been a while now, this particular piece. But this is one of the probably classic modern string quartets of our time. So surprising, so humorous, so engaging, right? And I hope you agree when you take a look at this. So before I even play it for you, let me just show you the score. So this is very unusual to see a score like this. First of all, we have, of course, this is going to be for string quartet, okay, number 1. But look at what she does here. She puts the first beat, right? She says C here. C meaning C major. So she's telling you, oh, this is a C major chord, and she wants the players to know that. Next beat, E flat. Oh, this is E flat major chord. A major, right? The last chord there is E flat minor. And then we have G major, E major, D flat major, B flat minor, D major, okay? Now, if you take a look at the bottom of the system, she actually does a Roman numeral analysis of what the piece is about. So I've never seen this before in any piece of music, really, besides just doing these music theory analysis type of things for class. But just look at that very first set of instructions she has there. She says, okay, these first two chords, right? These first two eighth notes you see, this is in the key of C major, okay? So just take a look at this. So the first eighth note is G. In the viola, we're in treble clef. This is D. Second violin, G. And then the first violin is B. This spells out a G major chord. In other words, the 5 chord in C major, okay? 5 chord in C major. Next eighth note, you'll see C in the cello, E in the viola, G in the second violin, C in the first violin, C major, okay? And of course, that's 1 in the key of C. And then the very next beat, she modulates immediately to E flat major. So there's no there's no gradual change in key. She says, no, I'm going to modulate to E flat major, and I'm going to start on the 4 chord, okay? And here it is. Here's the 4 chord, A flat, C, and then we're going to go to E flat major, E flat, G, B flat on that last eighth note of the triplet. So it's just remarkable. And she's doing this, and she's got these half diminished 7th chords in there. She's got 6th chords. She's got like half cadences, plagal cadences, all sorts of different kind of cadences happening between each of these different sets. So of course we have a perfect authentic cadence in that very first beat, and so on as it goes through these 3 measures, and on and on and on. So it's just amazing how she built an entire piece of music from this concept of what would it sound like if we had many cadences done at a very fast speed. Like, what would that happen? What would happen if we did that, right? So again, when we think about musical concepts, right, or musical thoughts, as I like to call them, like this was her musical thought. How can we have many cadences in a piece of music, right? I said it in one sentence, right? So the idea is simple, but then the way she executed it, right? The way she executed it, you would need to study it, right? You would need to study it from other scores and then have your own spin on it. So I'm sure she's seen I'm 100% sure. I mean, that she's studied, thousands of scores in her life, and there was something in one of those scores, perhaps that made her think that, oh, what would happen if I heard these cadences that I know and love? What if they happened at a very fast rate? And here, she has them at a very high pitch level in terms of the range. She has them way up in the stratosphere, okay? We talk about timbre later on. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so let's take a listen. I promise you this is fun. Okay, and I encourage you, go over to YouTube, find this piece. Okay, there's a score follower video of it. It's just amazing. Okay, so even just from those first few seconds, you can tell, oh wow, there is something going on there, right? But what is it exactly? You look at the score, it's many cadences. Okay, it's just unbelievable. So again, these are all the different types of harmony, and of course, there are so many other kinds of harmony. But I just wanted to give you kind of a little introduction to it in this video. Okay, now the last musical thought that we want to take into consideration is timbre. Okay, so what is timbre? Timbre is going to be the quality or color of a musical sound that makes it unique and distinguishes it from other sounds. It is what allows us to tell the difference between different instruments or voices, even when they're playing the same note. Okay, so this is the last parameter that we're going to be talking about. And in my opinion, rhythm, melody, right? Harmony, timbre. These are basically just the only things that you can do with musical thoughts in terms of what is actually the sound that is being produced, right? Let's hear 3 timbres, okay? So let's hear like what kind of sounds that we can have and how these sounds are being thought of, okay? So here's the first timbre that we're going to think of here. This is by Niccolò Paganini, okay? This is from his Caprice number 24 from 1817. I'm just going to show you what a solo violin could be. These are the different possibilities. So even before we hear this particular piece, if you just take a look at that first bar, right, we can see that he travels through many different octaves in the violin. We start at this high C, and then we get down to this low A. If you continue on in the piece, you'll see he goes down to even a low D or C. At the very end, he goes down to a low A. So just in terms of the range, you'll notice that there's um, a different sound quality to the violin depending on how high or low you go. That's number one. The second thing you'll notice is that in the very first bar, you'll see that he writes arco, pits, pits, arco, pits, arco, pits, pits. Arco, and we'll talk more about this in the instruments module later on in a few weeks. Arco just refers to having a bow sliding on the string of a violin, okay? And this is something that we typically think of when we think of a string instrument, right? Pits simply means you're just going to pluck at the string rather, okay? And he indicates this with a plus. Okay, so this is his indication for that, just because it moves so quickly from one note to the other. He goes arco pits pits arco pits arco pits pits. He wants to give a delineation for what is exactly happening with those pitches that have a pit, so he doesn't have to keep writing it over and over and over like that. And there are occasionally some moments here where he's using what's called a left-hand pit. So normally we talk about right-hand pits when we talk about playing with string instruments, but here he has a lot of left-hand pits going on. We'll talk about this when we talk about strings in a later module. But I want to just show you that even with just one solo violin, you can have many different timbres. You can have timbres that relate to the range of the instrument. You can have timbres that relate to the actual technique that you use to play the instrument physically. Okay, so let's take a listen to this. Right, so one instrument can produce many different types of timbres. So you don't have to limit yourself. Even if you're composing for one instrument, we can think about what are the different possibilities in terms of timbre that instrument can have. So you can create things that fulfill the sound world that you envision, right? Even if you're just dealing with one particular instrument. So Paganini did this in his 24th Caprice. Okay, let's hear the next timbre. This is going to be by a modern-ish composer. Well, not that modern. I mean, this piece is from 100 years ago, pretty much exactly. This is a piece by Anton Webern, 5 pieces for orchestra. This is going to be the first movement for chamber orchestra, so we're expanding the palette a little bit more. But I want you to take a look at the score first before we take a listen to it, right? So a lot going on in the score, but I want to just point to a few things before we listen, okay? This particular piece is interesting in that it explores timbre in relation to melody. So what you're going to hear is a successive number of pitches over time, right? But instead of having those successive number of pitches happening in one instrument, right? Like we did in the Tchaikovsky example, the oboe solo or the Purcell and that soprano, etc., right? The successive number of pitches in this melody are happening across instruments. So if you just take a look at the score here, the very first sound that we're going to hear, and if you go 3 staves down, we see a trumpet playing the C sharp, and we see a harp also playing this B natural alongside. Okay, so there's that one sound. Then you go to the next bar, we don't hear we hear the celesta next. Okay, along with the harp, but the harp is playing a harmonic now, a slightly different sound. We'll talk about that later. And then we have in the strings, we have this harmonic happening. And then it continues on and on. You have the flute playing the next pitch along with the harp. And then you have the glockenspiel playing this triplet, okay? And so on. So you have this melody, but the melody is being changed very rapidly across time by changing timbres, in this case, changing the instrument, right? So this is Webern's musical thought. His thought is, okay, I want to change timbres quickly in this piece. How am I going to do that? Okay, I can do that by changing the instrument color quickly in a piece of music. And of course, he's dealing with many instruments in this case, right? He's got a big combination of instruments, so he can do that. So depending on the ensemble, of course, this will change how you think about this. But again, It's one idea, basically. It's one musical thought that he has, and he's executing it uh, on just this page, by the way. And of course, it continues on. But let's take a listen to what he does here. hmm And notice how, like the first three, 4 bars, right? He does start with this change in timbre in just the melody and just a melodic line. But then he says, okay, I'm going to slowly introduce a harmonic concept. And he brings in a secondary line along with it. Okay. So these ideas, or these musical thoughts rather, they're not static, right? They change over time, but there has to be some kind of musical thought that starts this, right? And every single example that we showed so far in this video has this. They all have this in common, okay? No matter how modernistic they sound or how traditional sound, they all have this in common, okay? So I want you to be open-minded, right? We need to be open-minded about all these things, because if you're not, then it might close you off to some really interesting possibilities that you may not have thought of if you were closed-minded before, okay? So that's my little PSA about that. Okay, next timbre. Oh, well, this is going to be this is, of course, I got to show my own example here. This is from my piece Duetto from 2022, version for flute and alto saxophone. This was originally written for 2 flutes, but then I had another ensemble at the Manhattan School of Music in New York. They played a version of this for flute and alto saxophone. I thought this would be a more interesting one to show you, because you can really hear the combination of timbre happening. So if you just look at this, this is just the first 3 measures here. You'll see that the alto saxophone has this line, and it's just a very basic line. Da-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da. It's very basic, right, in terms of the rhythm, right? It's just a bunch of 16th notes in a row, and the melody is quite basic as well. But notice what is happening with the timbre. In the saxophone, what's happening is, all I'm asking, all that funny natural down to the half flat symbol means is that I just want the saxophonist to just lip down gradually over that bar while they're playing that fingering. That's all I'm asking them to do. Okay. The half flat there, we'll talk about microtonality in a future video, but the half flat there just signals that I want to go down a half, or rather a quarter step, I should say. So not a full flat, right? But just in between. So I want there to be a little bit of a change of tuning going on there. But then in the flute, I'm asking the flute, these funny little diamonds means to basically overblow those bottom notes. So I'm asking the flute player to overblow, to play these, basically these octaves that they're doing. I want them to overblow octave and a fifth as it continues. Okay, so I want them to overblow those bottom notes, and you get this kind of what I call a super instrument. You have basically a super instrument. To me, this means that you have 2 instruments or more playing the same or similar material, but the overall impact is that it's producing it's one instrument, right? So you're creating an instrument out of many instruments. You're basically creating your own instrument, right? Because at the end of the day, these instruments are creating vibrations in the air that are hitting your ears, right? So so we can create our own instruments in a sense, because we're just changing how the air vibrates around our ears. So I wanted to do that with this particular piece. And for much of it, it does things like this, where the alto sax and the flute are playing together, and you can't really hear which one is the flute and which one is the saxophone. You can't really distinguish the sounds, because really I wanted them to feel like they were one instrument. So that's why I wanted to show you this version rather than the 2 flute version, because that one you can really tell, okay, those are 2 flutes. Here it's like, oh, I'm not really sure what that is, And that was the problem I was trying to solve with this arrangement. How do I make a saxophone and a flute, which really are very different instruments, sound like they're one instrument? Okay, so let's take a listen to this. Right. So to me, at least, it sounds like the saxophone is activating like air around it, right? And that's what the flute player is. So however you think about it, right? This was the sound world that I was trying to go with in terms of timbre, right? In terms of thinking about the timbre parameter of this, right? Separate from the melody, separate from the rhythm, separate from the harmony. Okay. So let's summarize what we talked about here. So, what is an idea? An idea is simply an extra musical concept or a musical thought. Okay. So, we went over extra musical concepts earlier on in terms of, it having to do with an emotion, maybe a place, a person, maybe something to do with visual art, maybe something to do with literature, right? Extra musical concept basically come from your experiences as a human in summary. And then in terms of musical thought, we think about things like rhythm, right? Which is the pattern of sounds and silences in music, organizing how notes are played over time. It determines the timing and the flow of the music, create a sense of movement and structure. Okay, and we heard some examples of that. Another musical thought that we went over is melody, right? A sequence of musical notes that is perceived as a single line. And of course, we talked about the melody pyramid. Remember, we talked about melody, tune, motive. Okay. We talked about another musical thought, which is harmony, a combination of different musical notes sounding together at the same time. And we heard pieces that had various levels of consonance versus dissonance and why it's important to have dissonance in your music at some level, right? And then we talked about timbre, which is the unique quality or color of a musical sound that distinguishes it from other sounds. It's what makes a flute sound different from a violin, even if they're playing the same note, right? And we heard various kinds of timbre and various scores, and including in my piece, right, with the flute and the alto saxophone, okay? I want to leave you with this last quote here by John Cage, the American composer John Cage. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones. Okay. Now, I think personally for me, I think what he means by this is that, Cage wants you to be open minded. Okay. Open minded of new things, right? Not to close yourself off to new possibilities, right? Um, I slightly disagree with the him being, this idea of being frightened of the old ideas, right? Because I think that we can learn a lot from the old ideas, right? We can learn a lot with how Tchaikovsky constructs a tune, right? We can learn about how Beethoven constructs a rhythm, how he has this kind of intense level of pattern recognition, and then he has that silence at the end of the whole phrase, right? And it makes you think, oh, something different happened there, right? So I think the healthy way to think about this is what is the relationship, right, between new ideas and old ideas. And the other thing that we should keep in mind too is that an idea might be new to you, right? But it might not necessarily be new in general. Like somebody else, like across the world, or maybe 10 years ago or 50 years ago, may have came up with the idea that you thought was new, right? So that's just something to keep in mind that there are very new, truly new ideas under the sun, right? So it's important for us to be acclimated with like what are the types of musical thoughts that we could have, right? And to draw on your experiences, to draw on those extra musical concepts, right? That we've been talking about in this video. Okay, so let's go out there and compose. I feel like talking about writer's block this soon in the process is fundamental for us to understand how to function as composers. Writer's block is one of these really misunderstood tenets of what it means to be a creative, and I want to dispel some myths and offer some solutions as we go along in this course. So here we are at Preludes to Writer's Block, and we'll have more specific examples as we go throughout the course. But here's what we're going to cover in today's lesson, okay? The idea of genius. Like, what is a genius exactly? Okay. I want to dispel this myth from the get go. Okay. The next thing we're going to cover is inspiration. Like, what is the role of inspiration when we're composing music? It's so crucial to just get this out of the way, right? Right at the beginning. Okay. This is a lot about mindset as much as it is about technical skill. Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is our mistakes. So, what's mistake one, right? When it comes to writer's block, what's mistake number two? And what's mistake number three? Then at the very end, we're going to have a summary. Okay. So again, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Okay. I have exclusive content over there, and those are my handles. All right. And share the course. If you love the course, let's spread our love of composing as well. Okay. And warning, this is going to be the most important video in the entire course so far. Watch the entire video. Don't skip, don't fast forward. And pro tip, watch the video in 2x speed unless there is music playing. Luckily for you, there is no music playing in here, so you can just watch it at 2x speed. Okay, let's talk about genius for a moment, all right? What do we mean by genius, okay? So according to Merriam-Webster, a genius is a person endowed with extraordinary mental superiority. Okay, so it's pretty broad in its definition, but I would say that yes, we would probably agree, right? In general, this is what we would think of when we think of a genius, someone that's endowed with extraordinary mental superiority, right? We think, oh, this person is on a different plane than some other person, right? He's on or she's on this higher plane of mental capacity, or maybe they're using more of their mental capacity than the next person down the line, okay? Now, but let's be more specific now and extend this to our vision of the genius composer. All right. We've seen this in movies like Amadeus and Immortal Beloved, and in ad campaigns by orchestras and opera companies around the world. Like, how many times have you heard, oh, Mozart was such a genius, oh, Beethoven was such a genius, Bach was just a genius? Like, how often do you hear this? You know, it's like a broken record. Like, I mean, these composers that get played over and over again, they must be getting played over and over again because they were such geniuses, right, in their time. Like, they must have been like basically these gods on earth, right, in terms of their mental capacity. Okay. And even with these orchestras, like, I'm not going to name but basically all of them. Okay. Basically all of these professional orchestras and opera companies around the world, I mean, they don't hesitate and say that, oh, this person is a genius, you know, Tchaikovsky is a genius. And with very little regard actually to living composers, very rarely do I hear, oh, this living composer is a genius, right? I never really hear that. It's that, oh, this living composer is being programmed alongside Brahms, who was a genius, right, in his time. So it's very interesting how we equate this word genius and what we mean by genius, and how we're trying to sell something too. We're trying to tell a general audience, hey, you should be paying attention to this thing because it was created by a genius. I mean, like, fundamentally, like, why, but why, right? Why? And what does this idea of genius mean? Do we have to be geniuses too to be composing music? Okay. And I want to show you, you know, what I think, and what I think too, this is just my opinion, but I don't think it's an opinion. I think it's quite real. The idea of the genius composer simply does not exist. So this is my hypothesis, right? This is my general thinking behind this, is that this idea of the genius composer, it just doesn't exist. Okay, there are other ways, more tangible ways, that these composers have become who they are. That has nothing to do with their mental capacity or how much of their brain they're using or any innate talent that they were born with out of the womb. Because this word genius, it has that kind of connotation that you were born that way. You were born a genius, right? Nothing in your environment made you that way. It was, you were born like that from birth. So we're gonna try to dispel that myth as we go forward in this course. And I think that this will be something that you will take comfort in as well. And this is also how I feel personally, is that my mental capacity has nothing to do with my success as a composer, or that I feel very little in terms of writer's block as I'm going through a piece of music. Actually, it's a lot of fun for me to compose nowadays, okay? And let me give you an example of Mozart. We've been talking about Mozart with the film Amadeus, right, which portrays him as this genius composer with flaws, for sure. They portray some of that, but they do portray him as a genius, for sure, in many, many scenes throughout the movie. According to Dr. Michael Howe, a psychologist at the University of Exeter, Mozart had practiced an estimated 3,500 hours by age 6. So I'd like you to reflect on your own compositional practice. Have you reached 3,500 hours of pure composing time? How much of that time was purposeful, focused writing without distractions? The true secret lies in the hard work and developing tools within ourselves to compose rather than waiting for a sudden burst of inspiration. So there are these scenes in Amadeus where it just looks like he, especially at the very end, he's writing, no, spoiler alert, he's writing his requiem and he's just like notating it, or rather he's dictating it to Salieri. Oh, write F, write A, write C, write it in the horns. And it just looks like somebody from up high is telling him what to write, right? This is a very romanticized version of what it means to compose and this idea of what it means to be a genius. Okay, so we're going to dispel some of these myths as we go along in this lesson. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about, of course, is this idea of inspiration, right? Because inspiration has a lot to do with the idea of the genius, and it has a lot to do with the idea of writer's block. So, according to Thomas Edison, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Okay, so this actually should be a really comforting line from one of the great scientists of modern history. Okay, and if we go to a musical example, right? Conductor and composer Esa-Pekka Salonen, he adapted this to composing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. This emphasizes that composing is a skill that can be learned through practice. This idea, which I call the composer's brain, will be explored more in depth during this course. So this is the the meat of this course, this community, the composer's brain. I mean, this is the essential thing that I hope that you get out of this lesson in particular, that composing is not 99% inspiration and 1% perspiration. It's not like how they depict in the movies or how you might think so based on all these extra influences or advertisements or things like that you might see on social media and where you just see the result, right? Composing is 1% of that, 1% of inspiration, okay? And all that perspiration, that 99%, that's the stuff that people don't see, okay? And I learned this very, very, very early on. I was very lucky to learn this very, very early on when I was around 15, 16 years old, because I heard Esa-Pekka Salonen say this. And for whatever reason, this line, composing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, this has stuck with me for the last 15 plus years. Okay, so I share that along with you, and it's an extension of what Thomas Edison said as well. Okay, initial musical ideas can come from a general concept, a specific musical idea, or a mix of both. Most composers struggle not with generating ideas, but with three common mistakes. So we talked about this idea of a general concept, a specific musical idea. We talked about this in the last module, okay? But it's not that composers struggle with generating those ideas. Sometimes they do, right? But oftentimes they struggle a lot with, like, okay, once they have that idea, how do they develop it? And the problem is that a lot of that, they feel that, they have to have inspiration to develop those ideas. Whereas remember, composing is just 1% inspiration, okay? So let's take a look at the first mistake that composers make when it comes to this tenet, okay? So the first mistake, writing initial ideas directly into music notation software instead of on manuscript paper. This limits imagination and traps ideas in a rigid rhythmic grid. Handwriting music helps develop a better mind-muscle relationship with musical ideas. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen this with my students, that they go straight into the notation software and it quite looks like that as well. And I can't tell you how many times I've had students tell me that when they, trusted in the process of writing by hand and really committed to it, how much, not just like how much better their music was, but how much more fun they were having, like being away from a screen, being away from social media, and like really feeling in tune with their bodies, having that mind muscle connection with their hand, right? Like, this is really powerful. And I think that's something that composers in general are not taking into consideration. I always start everything with manuscript paper. And even when I start inputting stuff into my music notation software, that manuscript paper is always there, right? Always nearby in case I need to sketch something out, okay? So that's mistake number one. And a study found that handwriting activates more complex brain connectivity than typing, aiding memory and learning. EEG data from university students showed more elaborate brain activity when handwriting compared to typing. This activity is crucial for memory formation and encoding new information. So there is data out there to support this, right? And this was a more general study, right? This wasn't something that had to do with music composition specifically. It was more about this writing, like writing words by hand versus typing words by hand. But the same is true for composing. It's a similar activity. You're using a similar creative part of your brain as well. So crucial to just trust the process that yes, I'm handwriting music. Of course, this is not going to be the final product. I'm not saying that you should handwrite music and then present it as a score or present it as a part for a musician to play out of. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for you to develop your own ideas and then to have them be continuously being developed throughout an entire piece, it's crucial that you form this mind muscle relationship, okay, from the onset, hopefully as you're starting your process of composition, okay? So, really, I can't stress how important this is. I always have stacks of manuscript paper right by me when I'm composing, okay? Now, this is one of my students. He says that one of my more significant challenges has been a sort of a perfectionist writer's block, where I wouldn't write anything down unless I thought it was really, really good. Saad's push to put pen to paper as soon as practicable and applying the composer brain is helping me overcome that a lot. So, Alex, he was one of these students that in the beginning, I didn't see much of the way of handwritten music. We did a lot of stuff on the computer in Sibelius, and he was very advanced on his own right before he even started to work with me. But once he started writing music by hand, not only did I see him writing much better music, right, he was having fun writing music, and ironically he was producing more music per week than when he was writing in the notation software. So you would think, oh, writing music by hand is slow, but actually if you're really like in the flow of things, you can actually be writing more music if you're using a manuscript paper, because you're not like sitting there in front of the notation software. Oh, how do I put this here? Oh, how do I do this? Or how do I put this? Oh, wait, hold on. I'm getting a notification from Facebook. Oh, hold on. There's something else I have to do. I have to look at my calendar, right? It's all of those things put together. But because Alex said, hey, I'm going to have my manuscript paper, I'm going to put it right here. And my task for today is to fill out this page, right? Having a clear goal. I'm going to fill out this page no matter what. And within a span of a week, the next time I saw him, he said, oh, wow, there's like 4 pages of music here. This is several minutes of music. So I was really proud of Sasha when he realized this. So I want to show you mistake number 2, okay? Mistake number 2 has to do with adding too many underdeveloped ideas to your piece. I see this so often with composers, no matter how much in the beginning of the process or how late in the process they are in terms of how long they've been composing, okay? Adding too many underdeveloped ideas to your piece, okay? And the way I tackle this mistake is to conduct what are called thought experiments. And as much as I'd like to take credit for this, it's not my idea. So once you have an idea you like, right? Like one idea you like, and this is how I counter this too many underdeveloped ideas mistake. Once you have an idea you like, one idea you like, start doing thought experiments. This technique, taught by Dr. Stephen Stuckey, involves tweaking your idea in various ways. Examples of thought experiments: make the second note longer, make the first note longer, make both notes longer, transpose the idea to every key, play it in thirds or fourths, invert the idea. You get the idea. So Dr. Stephen Stuckey, I mean, he would say this all the time. Have you done your thought experiments? Oh, let's do a thought experiment. What if you did this, right? So a thought experiment is basically a what if question. Like, what if I did this? And instead of just like having that be in your brain, what if? Write it down. You got your manuscript paper. So Beethoven did this a lot, by the way. So if you take a look at Beethoven's sonatas, symphonies, etc., and you look at a handwritten piece of manuscript paper, you can just Google this, right? You'll see that, like on the top staff, he would have his initial idea, and then he would cross it out, and then on the right below that, he would have another idea based on that first idea, cross it out. Then he does it again, cross it out. So it's like you can see the process happening, right? So this is kind of this is kind of a variation on that in terms of, okay, you have your initial idea, but instead of crossing things out, just make another version of that idea that's slightly different, right? It's still related, but slightly different. Then do it again, then do it again, then do it again, and do it again. And before you know it, you have a whole page of ideas filled out that are based off of that one idea. And guess what? You can use all those variations of that idea as developmental pieces, right? Or rather, as developmental fragments that you can use to create your entire piece, right? So guess what? This is part of that perspiration part. This has nothing to do with inspiration, okay? So that was what I learned from Stephen Stuckey, okay? Over time, you'll develop your own thought experiments. As you refine your voice, certain thought experiments will become instinctive, speeding up your writing process. So this has as much to do with instinct and with speed as anything else, right? And there are an infinite amount of thought experiments that you could have. The ones I listed in the previous bullet point are just a few of them that I thought of very quickly. There are an infinite amount of thought experiments that you can do to a piece of music, right? And we'll cover these more in depth as we go through this course. But I want you to be open-minded to the different things that you can do to an idea. And I've even realized in my own writing that there are certain thought experiments that I tend to gravitate towards, right? Certain things that I tend to gravitate towards while I'm writing. Like, for example, transposing the idea to every single key. I do this all the time. Like, as soon as I have an idea, I'm like, all right, great. What is it in C sharp? What is it in D? What is it in D sharp? What is it in E? Okay, great. What if I took the sixth degree of all those scales and put it up a tone, right? Or things like that. Like, I can just rattle them off here. So there are certain things that I like to do in every one of my pieces. And that is part of what creates a voice, this idea of what is a voice. Well, a voice is something that is, it's part of this lexicon, right? We're doing it right now, okay? So as we go through this course, we'll learn more specific things that have to do with each of these tenets. But I want to start opening your mind, right? That's what these three mistakes are all about. Okay, and this is one of my other students, Bailey Phillips. One of the struggles that I had is not knowing what to do with material in order to make a composition have forward movement. And this idea has helped me turn a musical idea into actual music, right? So this idea of thought experiments, right, which is one way of getting out of writer's block, right? And the thing with writer's block is to get out of writer's block, we have to do activities. We have to be active, right? And doing these thought experiments, it is active composing. You are getting out of your rut. To me, writer's block is inactivity, right? So this is a form of activity. And Bailey is saying, yes, that is something that he learned from studying with me, is that yes, a piece can have forward movement, right? But you have to conduct these thought experiments in order to do that, okay? So that was mistake number 2. Mistake number 3, all right? Mistake number 3, not breaking composition into small tasks. I call this approach "don't go crazy." So I've said this, I can't remember how many times I've said this to students, but don't go crazy, okay? And this is my 3-word tenet in life too. Don't go crazy. Don't go crazy in the positive, don't go crazy in the negative, okay? Don't go crazy when you're thinking about composition. There are so many things you have to do when you're composing a piece of music, no matter how short or long, no matter if it's one instrument, no matter if it's full orchestra with choir, okay? No matter if you're writing for film, no matter if you're writing for dance, no matter if you're writing a multimedia piece or piece for the concert hall. There are so many things you have to do when you're writing one composition. You need to break it into small tasks. Often I see students saying, "Oh my God, like how am I gonna do this?" Right? And even with famous composers and film composers, they would say, "Oh, I finished this piece, this score. Like, I don't even know how I'm going to start the next one." Right? So, um, you start the next one by breaking it into small tasks. Okay, so focus on one small task during each writing session. Don't worry about future tasks. Completing small tasks builds confidence and progress. Finishing small tasks helps you enter the flow state, a highly creative mindset. This approach also helps prevent writer's block. So, again, if you are cognizant about what your small task is for that session, right, that composing session, it will keep you focused on that small task, right? And when you finish that small task, guess what? Your mindset is going to start to change. You're going to start to say, hey, I can actually do this, right? And there's nothing like having a little bit of a internal confidence boost to get you to the next small task, then the next small task, and then the next small task, okay? And before you know it, the piece is done. So again, really, really, really important to say, what is going to be my small task today, right? Is it going to be, all right, I had this idea I generated yesterday in terms of rhythm, right? I came up with this rhythmic idea that I really like. All right, what are 10 versions of that rhythm that I can do, right? And that can be your small task for the session. You don't need to think about melody or harmony or what instrument is playing that rhythm, right? That will be your small task for the day. Then the next day you say, all right, these are the 10 that I came up with. I really like them. Okay, what can I assign maybe some melodic interval to that rhythm? Okay, can I do that for all of them, right? And before you know it, then the inspiration part of it comes in. That 1% says, oh, I know what to do with that line. Here's 30 versions that I just did. That line is going to be played by the violin in this register, and it's going to be in the beginning of the piece. And those are your moments of inspiration. But they can only happen after you do a series of small tasks. And you have to trust this process, okay? I've done this dozens and dozens of times when writing my own music. And again, it's always the same. It's like, how did I write that last piece? I'm about to start this new. Well, because I trusted this process that I'm showing you right now, okay? Now, another student of mine said, one can endlessly drain themselves putting ideas together to form a piece, but with calculated preparation, the piece will write itself, okay? Developing this skill has taken a lot of hard work out of my writings. This is from Will Sakar from the United Kingdom. So again, Will says, yes, you can keep you can keep going around a circle, right? And going around a circle, but developing this skill, right? Developing the skill of having thought experiments, right? This idea of the composer's brain. Actually, this takes a lot of the hard work or the perceived hard work out of the writing process. You're kind of like letting the piece write itself in a way. Okay. So Will experienced this as well after I showed him some of these skills. Okay. So, summary. Again, inspiration. When we talk about inspiration, we're talking about composing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Okay. Emphasizing that composing is a skill developed through practice, avoiding common mistakes like over relying on software, adding too many ideas, and not breaking tasks into manageable steps. Okay. When we're talking about mistake number one, typing directly into music notation software first. Okay. That's a big mistake. Remember, handwriting music on paper enhances creativity and memory better than typing directly into notation software. Mistake number two, too many undeveloped ideas. Remember, use thought experiments to refine your ideas by tweaking them in various ways, which will help you develop your own creative process over time. And then mistake number three, not breaking composition into small tasks. Remember, focus on one task per session to build confidence, progress, and enter into a creative flow state rather, which also helps prevent writer's block. Okay, so we're going to dive into each of these mistakes more directly, right, and give you more actionable steps. But I want to give you kind of an overview of what exactly is going on when we deal with writer's block. Writer's block is essentially related to this idea of lack of inspiration, or this perceived lack of inspiration, this kind of like almost like unwillingness to do the hard work, or rather the perspiration, and also like making these excuses that, oh, I have to be a genius, right, to be composing high level music. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. So a lot of it has to do with mindset, right? And then mindset in combination with realizing this kind of high level, um, this high level, relationships between these things, and then doing actionable things like, not typing directly into the notation software first, uh, realizing when you have too many underdeveloped ideas, and then realizing when you're like trying to tackle on too many things at once, right? Rather than doing one small thing at a time. Okay. And I'm going to leave you with this quote by our friend Johannes Brahms: without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind. Okay, so even Brahms himself, who we think as a genius composer, right? Even he even says this too. He says that inspiration is just a mere reed shaken in the wind if you don't have a level of technical craftsmanship, right? When you think about a craftsman, I'm thinking of someone like a carpenter, maybe a roofer, maybe a painter, someone like that, right? And can they do certain things in a whole day, right? Some of them can, right? But think about like a composition, right? Composition is this kind of this big task that has a lot of small tasks within it, right? Think about like building a house, for example, right? Does a house get built in one day? No. And I saw that in real time. There was a house that was built right behind our house. And, this house was, there. It was quite an old house. They were building it about a year or so ago, or rather it was standing a year ago or so, but it was like kind of falling apart, right? And there was a builder that came in and started tearing down the walls one by one, and then reconstructing the house one by one. And it didn't take even, you would think that, okay, maybe someone that really knows what they're doing, they can do it quickly in a week or two or something. But no, it took months and months and months and months. I mean, it was like a 6-month project, uh, almost every single day. And when they were building the house, I noticed that they weren't like building several different parts of the house at one time. Like they were focused on one specific part of the house, like each week, right? So they were putting it into small tasks, right? They weren't like building like one of the walls while also painting that wall. They would build a wall, then build another wall, then build another wall, right? And then at the very end, they would paint the house. So it's very interesting when you see it from other fields, because they've kind of got it down, and we would expect that too with other fields. But for whatever reason, in an artistic field, we don't feel that it's the same level of craftsmanship, right? There's something strange about that. So I love this quote by Brahms. Inspiration is just a mere reed shaken in the wind, right? It could come and it can go, right? So really important here. So let's go out there and compose. See you next time.